Acting as the Game Master, or Dungeon Master, in a tabletop role-playing game takes a lot of thinking on your feet. Players will do things you don't expect. You'll find yourself suddenly unable to find that bit in the adventure book that tells you how that NPC is going to respond to what's happening, or you can't quite figure out how the game rules apply to what players are doing in the moment. Believe it or not, this is where taking some wisdom from the world of improvisational comedy can really help you out. And in this video, I'll go over 4 concepts from stage improv that come in really handy when running games. I'm Dave, and this is the one and only RPG Rundown. If you guessed that I'm going to mention yes and, you're absolutely right. But I think people often miss the full meaning and the spirit of that saying, so I'll try to explain the greater meaning to it. You know, somehow, at some point, one of the most well-known idioms from the improv world seemed to cross over into the mainstream, and everybody's saying it these days, and that idiom is yes and. So our first principle is say yes, and this is the one most people are thinking of when they quote yes and. Saying yes basically means accepting what has happened and rolling with the punches. Often, yes and is used as shorthand for saying yes to life, trying to make yourself more open to possibility and success by retraining your thinking from the default rejection of an idea to reframing the idea to try to find ways you can agree with and accept it if possible or reasonable. For our purposes, saying yes means accepting what your players have created. In improv, when a scene partner establishes something in the scene, we often phrase this as our scene partner giving us a gift by adding information to the scene. For example, if I'm in a new scene with another improviser and they start out by saying, "Houston, I couldn't be more excited for this launch," then I know we're in the space program, we're about to launch something, and I'm likely in the control center at Houston, while they're likely somewhere else, possibly in a rocket or shuttle preparing to blast off. That bit of creation is a gift to the scene and to the players in that scene. But if I respond by rejecting the idea with some quip like, "Oh boy, Grandpa, time again for your crazy pills. You goofball, we're at your nursing home," I might get a quick laugh from the audience, but now the scene is dead. I have rejected the reality my scene partner put out there, and there really isn't anywhere to go with the scene now. So it's a better idea to agree with fellow performers. If I go ahead and say yes to this NASA theme the other performer has begun, things are more interesting and engaging. We can go ahead and have a scene about 2 people involved in trying to pull off a big space launch. Here's an example of how this applies to a tabletop RPG. I once had a playgroup who wandered into the dwarven neighborhood of a city and struck up a conversation with an NPC guard. I had nothing planned for this. This was just an ordinary, boring guard. But my players were really interested in that guard for some reason. They wanted to know what his life was like, what his job was like, did he have family, and so on. I had prepared for a whole other thing to happen when they got into this city, but for whatever reason, they'd loved this guard who was moments ago completely insignificant to the story. Well, I decided to lean into it and make up on the spot this guard's whole life and his biggest problem, which was prejudiced treatment against dwarven folk from the majority human city government. He had suspicions about some things that didn't add up. Now, of course, you shouldn't say yes to every last thing. I'm not saying here that the player is always right in some absurdly absolute way. If they ask you if that wish spell can transport them to Prohibition-era Chicago in our reality, where they want to play gangsters, it's probably the time to say your character has no idea what that is, and also, no, the wish spell doesn't do that in my game. Unless you happen to have this old chestnut and have somehow already prepared an adventure for it. But I think a very common tendency among us GMs is defaulting to the answer no for a lot of requests that aren't that extreme. There are many reasons we do this. One is to keep things manageable. A lot's going on in a tabletop RPG game. There's so many little things to remember, to keep track of, and note for future reference that it can really feel overwhelming. So when something comes up you didn't prepare for, it's really natural to have an impulse to refuse it, to not want to go along with it. But if you stop and think about it, it's exactly this kind of game mastering that often makes players complain of feeling railroaded down an unchanging path. They're players, and they want to engage in this game of make-believe. Why not play along with them? So that's the yes part. And that example from my own game, the players wanted this dwarven guard to be interesting, so I went ahead and made him interesting. I could have chosen to have him ask them to move along. I could have made him be irritated by their interest and just refuse to talk to them. And that would have been fine, but ultimately it was more interesting and more satisfying for them when the guard engaged with them. There are just times like this where yes is a better answer than no, and probably more times than we normally think. But that brings us to the second principle, which is say yes and. Yes means not only that I say yes to the initiation, but that I add something to it. That's the and. In other words, yes is accepting my scene partner's gift of information, and is me responding with a gift to them. So in the previous improv example, when the other improviser declares that I'm at Houston Control and they're about to pilot a launching spacecraft, I can respond with something like, Roger, we're excited too, especially to be launching the first teen social media star into space. Now I've given them a fuller identity than just someone piloting a spacecraft. I said yes to the NASA thing and added the bit about an influencer going on a space mission. There's a lot more we can do in this scene now than we could have done with the crazy grandpa thing. Funnier things can happen. There's opportunity for social satire and more. And this is the real full meaning of yes and. It's both things. Yes is you accept the creative gift your scene partner gave you, and being someone with good manners, you return it with a gift of your own. What's important here is the acceptance of the gift of whatever has been added to the reality of the scene and giving a gift back by expanding on it, by connecting it. So continuing that gameplay example, when my players learned about the city government's prejudice against the dwarves, I also decided that, as it turned out, the city was secretly paying off a criminal organization to cause more trouble in the dwarven area in order to keep it considered less safe and thus less prosperous than human districts. And it just so happens that criminal organization was the one the PCs had come to the city to investigate. So yes, okay, the dwarf is now really, really interesting, and he's interesting in a way that connects back to the story that players were already invested in. It's just that now Dwarf Town and this guard are part of it, because the players seem to like that. The third improv concept that can help us in game mastering is there are no mistakes. This is actually just a specific outworking of the yes and principle, in the sense that if you do something you hadn't planned on, something you would normally consider a mistake, well, it's out there in the story now. You say yes and to what you thought was a mistake, but actually, you're creating reality during the game. There don't have to be any mistakes at all. You called an NPC the wrong name? Guess what? That's their name now, as long as it isn't taken by another character the PCs already know. You forgot and missed it in your notes that an NPC named Reginald was supposed to be angry with the party the next time they saw him, and instead you played him as smiling when they came in and he greeted them warmly? Then your stomach sank as you realized, oh yes, he was actually supposed to confront them about something that upset him, and this was a major plot point. Of course, you could start the scene over and retcon it. Most players won't be bothered by this, but you really want to keep that kind of thing to a minimum because it breaks immersion. It breaks the illusion that you're all building together. Much of the time, a much better choice is to just roll with it. No, I don't mean rolling dice. I mean roll with it. Let it be what you made it, whether it went according to your plan or not. Maybe now Reginald feels spiteful toward the party and is being fake friendly. You could put in some little tells of this that will prompt the PCs to want to do an insight check. If they succeed, they get the sense that he's nursing a grudge and planning something. Or you could choose for Reginald to feel openly conflicted. He was so happy to see the PCs that out of habit, he was friendly, but he catches it. Maybe he even says to them, oh, you've done so much for me, it's hard to be angry. It is good to see you, but I'm upset and we need to talk about something. Or some other choice that says, yes, he was happy to see them when they came in, and this makes things complicated for him because... I think you probably get the idea. Give it a try. Roll with your so-called mistakes sometime and see how it goes. The fourth concept is to trust yourself and take risks. Not only should you not worry about unplanned changes to your story, since you can handle them with yes and, you should also leave room to be spontaneous. Don't try to plan out and control every last angle of the scenario. In fact, when you do this, you often run the risk of making things feel boring and railroady for your players, even if you have several planned options for them. It's okay to leave some things open to play out and discover on the spot. Now, I'm not saying to plan loosely or not plan at all, although those can be legit styles of game mastering when done well, but I'm saying don't feel like every last thing must be pinned down. It's liberating and fun to be flexible enough to improvise at the game table, and the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. But trusting yourself begins with taking some risks. So do that. Challenge yourself and see how it goes. If one of your players asks if there's a magical college or guild in town and you didn't create one, but you vibe with the idea and you think there should be, go ahead and make one up right there. Give it a name. Maybe it's known for something, like its founder having fought off an infamous lich who lived in the tower that is now the college's flagship administration building. I just now pulled that out of nowhere, but it's plenty good enough to go in a game. Come up with just enough to get by at the table. Make some notes, and then in your next prep session, flesh that college out a little more. It's part of your world now, and why not? The thing is, most players want to play along with you in the storycraft, and they're invested in accepting what you create, not in nitpicking it. They'll often even help you flesh something like this out, and even to justify it. Those are my 4 improv concepts that can help you run games. I hope you found them helpful. Let me know what you think in the comments, and until next time, may all your 20s be natural. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Of course, it always helps us out if you like and subscribe. And check this video's description for a link to a few other cool things from Game Talk Network. Links to other channels in the Game Talk Network, like the Board Game Rundown, the Miniatures Rundown, and the Lorcana Rundown. A link to our Patreon for the Game Talk Network, where RPG Rundown is one of the pledge levels you can select. And a link to our GTN Discord server. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.